Wireless LAN Professionals Podcast, episode 191.
So this is actually a really good time to be talking because some substantial progress has been made since earlier in the year.
Wireless LAN Professionals is a place to educate, inform, encourage, and entertain those involved in wireless LANs. This Wireless LAN Professionals podcast is an audio manifestation of these goals. Our host is a wireless LAN veteran, consultant, designer, and teacher, Keith Parsons. And now, the podcast for wireless LAN professionals by wireless LAN professionals.
Hello again, this is Keith Parsons with Wireless LAN Professionals podcast, and today I've got Chuck Lukaszewski. How are you doing today, Chuck?
I'm great. Great to talk to you, Keith.
Are you back in the States now?
I am, actually, for 36 hours or so.
Do you need more than that? I mean, you just...
No, I got back from Europe 2 days ago. So,
and I'm heading off in the morning to Europe, so we just kind of have a chance to get together. I thought it would be good for our audience to just get a recap from you. You gave a really good presentation at the last WLPC on the state of Wi-Fi 6 gigahertz and kind of where things are going. And I thought it'd be good to kind of catch up since the FCC has made some rulings and moved on a little further. And both that and Wi-Fi 6, they're both have sixes. So maybe that could be our topic for the day.
Sounds great.
Well, let's start with the first one. What's up with 6 gigahertz, both in the US and in the rest of the world?
So this is actually a really good time to be talking because some substantial progress has been made since earlier in the year. And let me walk you through both. So we'll start with the US. We've been really gratified. Wi-Fi spectrum continues to be really a bipartisan issue, and we've had strong support from both Democratic and Republican members on both the Hill as well as at the Commission. I imagine most people in the audience know that the FCC has commissioners and they're appointed, and typically they're affiliated. You have 2 Democratic commissioners and 3 Republican commissioners, and it was it was great to see, as opposed to maybe some other things the FCC is working on, that we actually had a unanimous vote last year to proceed with the rulemaking, and so that's kind of the first thing you have to achieve is you want to have broad-based political support, because ultimately spectrum is a political decision. And then, of course, we want to be able to, assure the commission and the commissioners that we're going to be good stewards in the band and can safely coexist with everyone who's there. So we've been hard at work on technical studies. There have been a lot of filings in the record, both from the Wi-Fi community as well as for incumbents who are currently using the band, who are concerned about sharing with any new service. And Commissioner O'Reilly as well as Chairman Pai have been making quite a few comments recently. Chairman Pai was in testimony to the Senate Appropriations Committee 2 weeks ago and talked about his vision for all 1,200 megahertz that's been put forward for Wi-Fi as really being the right use of that band. Commissioner O'Reilly saying similar things last week at Mobile World Congress Americas, and then folks like Commissioner Rosenworcel on the Democratic side have been longtime champions of it. So we feel really good about the political support. From a timing perspective, we're hopeful. The chairman has talked earlier in the year about trying to get something done in 2019. I think that's probably a little aggressive, but we're really hopeful that we'll see at least a first report in order sometime in calendar Q1 of next year. And I think the big question beyond just what is the timing is what exactly will be in the order, and what are the rules? Are they are the rules things that are going to be easy to build sort of a market around, or are they going to be very onerous? So we can talk a little bit more about that, but that's the U.S. status. Before I jump to Europe, I'll just stop. Any questions on what I've covered in the U.S. so far?
You'd mentioned something about close to 2019. Did you mean 2020? Or were you serious they were thinking by the end of this year?
So Chairman Pai earlier this year said that he wanted the commission to act in 2019. But I think we're in November now. If you just look at the timing to get on the docket for one of the FCC open meetings, which happen, there's one basically every month. We've kind of missed 2019 now, and we're into probably February or March of next year.
Well, it's still really good news.
Yes. Well, again, assuming the rules are something that we can build a business around.
Well, there is that still. And do you have any feeling or take on whether or not those incumbents' technical reports were positive or pretty harsh? They're
all pretty harsh. That's the nature of this process. The way this works in the U.S. Is it's an adversarial process where incumbents basically are pitted against new entrants that would like their spectrum either exclusively or to share. As is in our case. And so you're almost never going to find an incumbent that is happy about having to share a band.
It's kind of a win-lose.
Yeah. I mean, nominally that's the case. But, one of the great things about Wi-Fi is of course, we're a low power application and we're very, we're chatty, we're bursty, but most Wi-Fi devices are not burning up significant amount of airtime most of the time. And so you can actually have a really massive number of Wi-Fi devices and not create that much energy on the air. And that's what we think makes this work so well.
Do you think there's going to be anything close to the 3.5, the CBRS range, kind of the SAS model for shared, or are you looking for more of like the pieces that you described at WLPC where we just have to stay underneath a certain limit?
Yeah, so good question. So let me just kind of recap the 3 device classes that are being debated right now, and these are for access points. Stations are just stations. They would work the same way in 6 gigahertz that they do in 5. So the 3 types of three types of access points are what we call standard power, and these could be indoor or outdoor, and they would go up to 4 watts or 36 dBm EIRP. So very similar to what we have today in the Uni 1 or Uni 3 bands in the US. And then the next level of device is called a low power indoor device. And those are capped at 1 watt or 30 dBm EIRP. And as the name implies, they would be indoor only. And then the third class of device is what we're calling very low power. And these could be indoor or outdoor. And you think the picture to have in your head would be a smartphone, right, that's tethering to a tablet or maybe some AR goggles, what have you, or maybe a mobile AP in a car, right, that doesn't need to transmit very far. So these would be capped, again, it's indoor, outdoor, and they would be capped at a very low power level of 14 dBm EIRP, or just 25 milliwatts. And so
actually, there's a lot of enterprise designs that are at that 14 dBm today.
That's true. That's absolutely true. But there are a lot that need higher power, right? If I think about warehouse deployments or stadiums or that type of thing. So we want to be able to serve all those use cases. So to your question about the SAS, and for those that don't know what a SAS is, this is the spectrum controller, spectrum database service that's required to use the 3.5 gigahertz band. That there in 6 gigahertz, the equivalent thing will be called an AFC, or automatic frequency coordinator. And this will be like a database, but way simpler. And of course, it's got to be very low cost. And these would apply to the top level that I just went through. So the standard power devices, whether deployed outdoors or indoors.
Those are the 4 watt versions.
Yeah, up to 4 watts, exactly.
And what about the other 2 levels? Will they have to do the same automatic coordination?
We don't believe so. We've put many studies into the record to explain, quantitatively why that's not the case. And this is kind of what I was alluding to earlier when I was talking about the rules. If when we get an order, are the rules going to be conducive to a market? Because if everything required an AFC, we think that that's going to impose a lot of friction. And, we just have to look at the DFS experience to see what a little bit of friction does to the Wi-Fi market. So our message to the commission has been, it's if we want to recapture all that magic that's happened in 5 gigahertz and 2.4, then we've got to have rules that permit a really diverse set of use cases and devices. And let's be smart about what rules apply to which ones.
I like that. It makes a lot less work on our part.
Yes. And so we've advocated that, there can be, essentially the low power indoor is safe across all 1200 megahertz. We'll see if we carry that argument. Of course, the incumbents, as we've said, are, completely of the opposite view. But we'll see. And the same thing with very low power. We've said, because the VLP devices are indoor, outdoor, we expect those to be permitted where there's AFC, right? Because that's also an outdoor class. But they wouldn't require AFC control because, basically we're trading this, massive reduction in power.
Any idea of when that ruling might take place?
Yeah, as I said before, we're really hoping for calendar Q1 of next year here in the U.S. And maybe that's a good segue if we can jump to Europe for a minute. Mm-hmm. So the Europe process is a quite different process. It's adversarial in its own way, but it's the Europeans are a very consensus-based model, and they have there are 28 countries, at least for now, in the European Union, but there's actually a broader group of 48 countries that work together to harmonize their radio regulations. And so that organization that they all operate under is called CEPT. And we've been executing now for about 2 years on a sort of a forced march of technical studies and analysis and public consultations and so on. And we've been moving against a deadline that the European Commission set, which is July of next year. So July 2020. To have completed 2 reports the first report basically answers the question of is sharing feasible with unlicensed devices? And then the second report is, okay, if the answer to question 1 is yes, then what are the rules, or what they call the harmonized technical conditions, under which that sharing can occur? And so we've completed the first report, and it was a ton of work. And the good news is that we ultimately did conclude that sharing is feasible. And when I say we, I mean not just industry, but all these administrations that are part of the process. And we're working on the second report now. And a draft text of that report was just reviewed at a recent meeting in Italy, and it looks pretty good. And back to those 3 device classes. So it looks like what Europe is going to do, they're very uncomfortable moving ahead with outdoors for now, at least for high power. And there's history behind that that we can talk about if you like. But that was not a surprise. We knew that was happening.
But don't they have far fewer point-to-points compared to the U.S.?
Yeah, that's correct. But no one knows where they are. So unlike the U.S., where there's the FCC operates a database that anyone can look at, in Europe everything is considered confidential or national security in nature, and so there's no database that you can go to look them up, and that makes it really problematic to do something like AFC, and it's just going to take us a while to figure that out. So in the meantime, what the draft language in Report B says is that sharing, basically low power indoor is fine up to 24 dBm. So a little lower than, just to remind the listeners, the FCC is looking at 30 dBm in the US right now. So Europe is going to come in about 6 dB lower for low power indoor, but they don't have the same reservations about it that the US does for exactly the reason you say. And then it does look like, at least at the moment, they're leaning towards doing the very low power. So we would have an indoor-outdoor class that would, make those sort of, smartphone or very highly mobile use cases feasible.
And about what's their kind of time frame? Earlier it had been 2021 plus, but I hear they're getting some stuff done in 2020.
Yeah, so the report gets delivered in July. We think the decision could come by October at the European Commission level. And then each of the countries, so now we're back to sort of the complexity. So each of the countries that wants to then proceed to open up their band to Wi-Fi has to change their national regulation. And that takes anywhere from 9 to 18 months, we've heard. Although they're all pretty motivated, so we think it'll go comparatively quickly. So all in, you're looking at sometime in mid to late 2021 to start being able to ship equipment in that would be 6 gigahertz capable.
Which means vendors who are making it have the U.S. market to kind of trial things. What between 6 and 18 months ahead?
That's correct. Now, it may be the case that you could ship in a 6 gigahertz product, but just not activate it. So again, it depends on what the final conditions are in Europe. And then later on, maybe you might be feasible to certify the hardware and do a software upgrade to activate a radio. So there might be some intermediate sort of scenarios there, but broadly speaking, the way you've laid it out is correct.
So the vendors who are making access points today and the vendors who are making clients within the next 18 months are going to have lots of work to do.
Exactly. And we've been hard at work for over 18 months, and we're just getting through it day by day.
Well, it's better than being bored.
Couldn't agree more. But with so much happening in radio these days, how could anyone be bored?
Yeah, there's lots going on. I just started playing with the iPhone 11 with CBRS, and it's like, oh, I got a whole new thing to play with now. And I think the whole SaaS model with the CBRS is a good transition for wireless LAN professionals to get used to thinking about the AFC, the SaaS model, to realize it's just not all automatic like we've had in the past. We're going to have to deal with both. But I do like the idea of the standard power and very low power that won't need a kind of that SaaS model. That'll help get these out a lot faster.
Yep, completely agree.
So thank you. That was a great recap of where we are with 6 gigahertz.
So that's one of the 6s.
Yeah, the other 6 is Wi-Fi 6.
Yep.
What's your take? Where are we on that? I know a lot of vendors, including the vendor you work with, have been shipping Wi-Fi 6 models. But the effect into the actual community and the industry as a whole, what's your take on when that's going to be, really taking off? Yeah,
so we're incredibly bullish on Wi-Fi 6. The adoption has been extremely rapid. Obviously, I can't share numbers, but I can tell you it's easily the fastest launch of any Wi-Fi generation in the 14 some odd years I've been at Aruba. And so it seems like customers are gravitating in that direction, very quickly. And of course, it helps that, as you mentioned, Apple and, of course, everyone was waiting to see what they were going to do on the new iPhone. And they did make a Wi-Fi 6 decision across the family. So you have Apple and Samsung both with Wi-Fi 6 products. And of course, on the laptop side, Intel has started shipping their card and volume and so on. So, we anticipate, just to give you sort of a real concrete example, it took us about 3 years, maybe a little less than 3 years to get to what I would call 50% penetration of Wi-Fi 5 devices onto in the client population. And just as if you look at one of our customer dashboards, right? If you just look at the breakdown of the different generations or the Phi Max, right? It was about 3 years. So based on where we are now and the products that are in the market, I would say we're going to see almost a full year of pull in from that. So we could be at 50% in 24 months, and that's just stunning, right? I mean, that's good news. The other part of it is we've been really forward leaning with Wi-Fi 6 into very high density deployments, and so we've just started announcing our first stadiums and arenas with Wi-Fi 6. We have numerous such facilities under construction right now, and the one I guess I would highlight is Ohio State University, which is about 102,000 seats, sixth largest collegiate football facility in the United States. We just went live there with Aruba Wi-Fi 6 product, and promptly went to the top of the Mobile Sports Report's lifetime data transfer rankings. In fact, it even beat out Super Bowl 53 from earlier this year. So we're not holding back. We're very comfortable with we like where the software is at. We like what the hardware can do, and of course it's the multi-user features, especially OFDMA, are really important for these types of environments.
I know you can't share specifics, but did you see much, if any, uptake of OFDMA in those, in that football stadium? Or is that just the newer hardware is just doing a better job with the older clients?
So I think it's right now, to be totally frank, I think it's more the latter. And the main reason for that is that the clients are not doing a lot of OFDMA yet. So even though we're capable of it on the infrastructure side, we're still kind of waiting for Apple and Google to kind of take full advantage of it. So as those drivers start to get a little more aggressive in terms of using the multi-user features, we expect to see even more improvement, particularly in terms of airtime management.
But hey, if you can get better airtime management without that, it just goes to show how well the hardware is improving just by itself from the infrastructure side.
Yes, exactly. And as you know, I mean, stadiums are noisy places, and so faster CPUs actually make a big difference, because every time a radio picks up what it believes is the start of a transmission, it fires an interrupt, right? And so just at a very low level inside access points, clock cycles do matter. Interrupt handling does matter, and so each new generation of hardware is more capable than the last, and so we get gains from that, as well as better aggregation and so on.
And every time we get newer chips, the better. I just have to give kudos to Aruba though, because I think I don't know how many years ago when I first learned this, that Aruba said we're not going to charge more for the latest rev than the last rev. I like that. It helps get people to move to the new stuff without the fear of, oh no, I'm paying extra money.
Yeah, well, we've certainly tried to sort of keep the price points similar for the similar functionality. Of course, I guess I'm obligated to point out that as each new generation has created new form factors, right? So think 8x8 access points now versus 4x4. Of course, those products come in at a higher price because they've got they're more capable. But we do try to, within a class, we try to keep things, as consistent as we can.
Just throwing in an extra little piece of data here before we end up. I'm going to put in the show notes a link to a presentation at the WLPC in Prague a couple of weeks ago by Philip Beck, who talked about 6 gigahertz in the European market. Mm-hmm. He went through a lot more detail of some of the pieces that you covered. So there's some other places people can go. Is there any site you can recommend people go if they want to stay on top of watching where the 6 gigahertz is going to be coming down?
Well, I'd still have folks linked to the WLPC presentation I gave that you mentioned at the top of the broadcast. I think between the two, that's a pretty good summary. there's not really we're not really maintaining like a status blog or anything along that line. It's this advocacy work we're doing is really just direct between in industry and the regulators. But I think those two presentations are good, and Philip is great, and it does take a village, right? So we work closely. He's with a company called Lancome, which is a AP manufacturer that's based in Germany, I believe, and we're working closely with them, and we're working closely with other vendors, right? Because regulators don't release spectrum for one company, right? So we work closely with our colleagues at other companies in the space, and
actually they do give spectrum to single companies. You just have to pay them a lot of money for it.
Yes.
And one of the things I liked about Chairman Pai was how much he's forward thinking and realizing unlicensed spectrum has economic benefits that far exceed what the tax revenue might have been.
Yes, exactly. And, he's, some people may, whatever you may think of some of his other policy positions, I would hope that we could all agree that on this, we want him to follow through. And so I would actually encourage all of you, this is just I guess, as long as we're on the subject, Chairman Pai and really all the commissioners are really active on social media. I know this is a social group, even if I'm not on Twitter yet.
Oh, there's hope?
I said yet.
Okay.
But anyway, I'd encourage everybody to follow Chairman Pai and maybe and of course Commissioner Rosenworcel and Commissioner O'Reilly. And as they say things, particularly in testimony, or if you see an article or something, or they tweet something, it sounds strange, but they constantly monitor their Twitter feeds, and they love retweeting stuff out. So the more encouragement we can give them, particularly highlighting like real use cases where Wi-Fi is impacting the economy or jobs or some really interesting use case, disaster recovery, who knows? Every little bit helps.
And they actually have some pretty decent retweets they do. They're obviously very active at it. So,
yes.
Well, thank you, Chuck, for your time. I appreciate you able to out of your 36 hours, squeeze a little bit of time for our audience. And hopefully we'll get back and hear some things after March, April timeframe to see if it's moved on a little bit.
Sounds great. If we get an order, maybe I can come back to WLPC and walk everybody through what we got.
That'd be great. Thanks for your time, sir.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
10 Talks.
Good morning, everybody. My presentation is called How Do I MBR Thee? Let Me Count the Ways. And this is a little bit of a head nod to the poem written by Elizabeth Browning, How Do I Love Thee? My name is Troy Martin, and you can find me on Twitter at TroyMart. Kind of like the Quickie Mart in The Simpsons. So my 10-minute agenda, I'm going to talk a little bit about slogans, kind of messages, mantras, if you will, that we kind of use across many different areas. And then I'll pick one specific to Wi-Fi, and I'll start breaking that down. I'm going to showcase the beacon frame. We're going to deep dive into that a little bit. I'm going to remind everyone briefly about the calculator tool, and I'll talk more about that. We'll look at bits in the air, and we'll get you guys to imagine frames flying through the air like a football being passed. And lastly, I'll suggest some MBR or minimum basic rates that I'd recommend as guidelines for us going forward. So first off, let's talk a little bit about carrots. Now, I'm sure many of you have heard the saying, carrots are good for your eyes. But let's take a look at this and where this comes from. So it is true that carrots are loaded with beta-carotene, and when you consume them, your body converts them into vitamin A, which helps maintain good health of your eyes. But does it improve your vision? Well, in the 1940s, Britain was under attack. There were a lot of planes flying in. They were bombing the country. And so they went to a blackout kind of program, where they shut off the lights at night to make it harder to see the targets. And they told the citizens in Britain not to worry, that if they ate a lot of carrots, they'd still be able to see and get around at night. And they also had to pass along this messaging because the British Air Force had recently developed new radar technology, where they're able to track bombers while they're in the air. So they had pilots like John Cat Eyes Cunningham, who was successfully able to shoot down 20 bomber planes coming into the country. but they had to mask this new technology capability and pass along the message that carrots improved your eyesight. And this saying took into effect for many, many years. Also, if you guys are hardcore nutritionists, you may have heard that carrots have a high glycemic index. Now, the glycemic index is a measure of the effect of consuming carbohydrates and its effect on blood glucose levels. So basically, you take a measure of consuming 50 grams of carbohydrates and you measure the effect on your blood. And they set it on a scale between 0 and 100. If you ate 50 grams of sugar, you'd score 100. And then everything's kind of referenced to that. And so carrots themselves score relatively high on the glycemic index. But it's because you need to consume 50 grams of carbohydrates. Now, it turns out there's roughly 8 grams of carbs in 1 cup of carrots. So to hit that threshold, you have to consume about 1.5 pounds of carrots. Now, if you're able to scarf down 1.5 pounds of carrots, you'd see an increase in your blood glucose levels. But it's unrealistic to consume that many carrots. Also, as a side note, carrots way back in the day typically ended up being purple, and the orange carrots are a mutation of the carrots. So the carrots we're eating today are a mutation of the early day carrots. Okay. So the slogan that I want to focus on my talk is disabling lower data rates. And let's break that down, see kind of what that means, and I'll look at some data points that I think it's relevant to consider when we think about this saying. So first, the beacon frame. So going back to the poem, How Do I Love Thee? It's a Petrarchan poem. It's a sonnet consisting of 14 lines. The first 8 lines make up the octet. The last 6 lines finish the poem, make up the sestet. And I realized to me, looking at this breakdown of the beacon, that the fields within a beacon are to the Wi-Fi engineer like the words are to a poet. Okay? Every bit has meaning and purpose, just like every word in a poem has meaning and purpose. Okay? And you can see in this slide that there are a lot of fields that are mandatory. They have to be there, your source and destination MAC address, mandatory components. But there's a lot of variable and variable length fields, right? A lot of amendments and additions going into beacons. So effectively, we're seeing beacon bloat as we add more features and enhancements to this. Yesterday, we saw a Human's presentation about OWE and how there's additional fields being added to the beacons, which causes beacon bloat. And we're going to look at the effect as we increase the length of beacons, what that does to our airtime utilization. So just before we go too far into that, let's talk about the calculator. I'm sure you guys are aware of anyone who isn't. There's a SSID overhead calculator that was released by Andrew Van Nage, Revolution Wi-Fi. If you go to his website, you can download it. It's essentially a spreadsheet, but it lets you plug in a data rate. You define the length of the beacon frame, and you can calculate the airtime consumption used by the beacon frame alone. And to make this a little bit easier for us, Ryan Adzema has coded an iOS app that you can download on your phones, and you can run this application. So while you're sitting in meetings with customers and trying to explain to them the effects of beacons on their airtime utilization, you can show that to them directly. Okay. Now, in Jim's presentation earlier in the week, he suggested that every good presentation needs a line graph. So this is my gratuitous, or the first of many gratuitous line graphs. And here you can see what I'm tracking. I just have 2 access points that are operating on the same channel. And I'm considering 3 SSIDs. So I believe you should be able to get pretty much everything you need to do with 3 SSIDs, ideally fewer than that, but about 3 SSIDs, you should be able to accomplish a lot. The line across the top shows the airtime utilization of 1 megabits per second. Okay, and the bottom line show 11 megas per second, and then the 6, 12, and 24 for both 802.11g and 802.11a. And what I want to show out of this slide is that there's significant airtime at 1 megabits per second. But as we drop down to those other rates, there's almost no difference or very little difference between those rates. We're looking at 1 or 2% of airtime, right? So the difference between going from a 6 to a 12, you're effectively saving very little bit. If we look at this slide, and we talked about, Ben Miller talked about airtime utilization. And so in this model, I'm theoretically predicting the airtime utilization. Where if you looked at pure utilization and took some metrics about that, it could be a little bit misleading. So these are just theoretical calculations. And again, with 3 APs hearing each other in the same channel, again, very little difference if you flip between 6, 12, or 24 as your lowest data rate. If we go up to 4 APs, significant impact on airtime utilization with 1 megabit per second. But if we keep holding on to those lower data rates, we don't see the same effect. And here's also a little bit of model. So this is just one access point in a hotel room. And so with a lot of these design tools, you can play around with the colors, make it more exciting. The red here, the boundary of the red represents a neg65 size cell. But where it turns gray, that's the difference between neg87 and neg91. And if just a particular AP that I'm modeling in this case, that neg87 and neg91 corresponds to the difference between the 6 and the 24 megabit data rate. So that space in gray is the difference in my cell size, right? So effectively, I'm not really changing the propagation distance or shrinking the size of my cell by picking 6 or 12. And we saw in the previous slides, there isn't much of an effect on the airtime utilization by choosing one of those data rates. If you were listening carefully during Eddie's shark fruit presentation, his tip number 2 was to pick columns that matter, right? So when you're doing your Wireshark captures, you can capture and filter on beacon intervals or beacon times, the time it takes to transmit the beacons through the air, and you can filter and you can look at that. And Adrian also showcased that within his tool, Wi-Fi Explorer, you also had the ability to visualize in real time how much airtime was being consumed by different beacons. And so this graph is showing for those various data rates on the left-hand side how much airtime is being consumed in microseconds for various beacon lengths, okay? And this, you can also imagine that if you took that football that I was talking about earlier, when you're hurling that football, this is how many milliseconds that football, that frame is staying in the air, preventing other devices from talking. So as those beacons grow and consume, they consume more airtime, then we may want to reduce the content or the information that's in these beacon frames. So how can we do this? One, maybe we want to disable the AP hostname. You know, potentially, depending on how long your hostname's in, that could save 10% of your beacon length, okay? If we're not using 802.11ax, we don't have those clients out, and we happen to purchase an 802.11ax AP, maybe shut off those capabilities and those data rates. We could disable QoS. We could shut off RSN, the robust security networks, right? That's going to consume extra bandwidth. We could disable OOE, or also a bunch of additional information elements. Now, really, those are silly examples. Silly things what we could do, okay? So I'm not being serious with those. But what would really help us is we just left the data rates alone and we design co-channel interference out of our networks. That would lead us to much more success. So the data rates that I'm suggesting, instead of saying 11B is dead, I just think it makes me feel really sick to my stomach if I leave 11B turned on. I'm suggesting we maintain 6 as the lowest data rate. You can also enable 24 as your highest minimum or highest mandatory basic rate. And if you're going to do that, why not turn on 12? Okay? And so just to leave you guys with a poem that Elizabeth Browning wrote to inspire you guys, think about what you're passionate about. Some of you may be passionate about your spouse, significant others, your pets in your life, but some people are passionate about co-channel interference. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Wireless LAN Professionals Podcast, the podcast for wireless LAN professionals by wireless LAN professionals. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Wireless LAN Pros for all the latest news and updates, and also connect directly with Keith on Twitter at Keith R. Parsons. Head over to www.wlanpros.com for this episode's show notes, as well as the latest in all things Wi-Fi.